Both my nephews, aged 4 and 6 at the time, kept slapping at their fries. This happened a couple of times. When asked why they were slapping, they both said, "That little boy keeps trying to eat them." I was staying with my mom at the time while she babysat them. She kept asking them to show her where they had seen this boy and walk to all the places they had seen him, even when he sleeps. I was completely ready to go back to my own place. When I was younger, like 10 or 12, I had an obsession with checking dark corners, just to make sure nothing was there. One night I went to get a glass of water from the kitchen. For some reason, the sliding door to the kitchen was closed, which was not an uncommon thing in my house. As I'm getting water, I look to the corner. It looks particularly dark, but I'm trying to break this habit of checking dark corners. So instead of turning on the lights to check, instead I wandered back to bed in my half-asleep state and closed the kitchen door on my way out. That night, my house was robbed. He got in from the kitchen patio door. I may have looked a robber directly in the eyes as he was robbing my house without realizing it.
This is Dead Air, and stories about the creepiest things people have ever experienced.
When I was a kid, we'd go to these beach cabins in Maryland right by the Chesapeake. They were small, rustic deals with basic comforts, nothing fancy like TVs or air conditioning. 2 bedrooms and a cot in the kitchen, and a small tradition was that my mom and I would have a hot cup of tea before bed in our summer jammies, and just our way of relaxing while everyone else went off to read or listen to music. Well, one night, I was settling on the cot when she picked up the tea kettle to fill it. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her flinch and then say in a steady voice, "What are you doing here?" My head whipped over to the kitchenette to see her looking out the window, and then she jumped back and started screaming for my father. Somehow he knew shit was getting real. He ran from the back bedroom and barely paused to see my mom point towards the left side of the house. He burst out of the house and towards the left of the cabin. I'll be the first to admit, I ran like a scared motherfucker and baseball slid under my parents' bed because, damn it, I was 10 and that's what kids do when they're terrified. I still remember the smell of the old wood and the feel of my teddy bear shielding me from whatever the hell was happening. I remember seeing my 14-year-old brother, then a medium-ranking karate student, following my dad out of the cabin at full speed. The rest of the story is an amalgam of what I've heard and what my family filled in for me. My father, a former army sergeant and MP with a Bronze Star, managed to tackle the guy that had been peeping into our kitchen window. He put him in an elbow lock face down on the ground, my brother standing sentinel over both of them, while my mom ran to get the cell phone we bought just 2 weeks earlier. This was in 1995 when those suckers had cords and everything. While my mom called 911, I remember hearing the guy talking. He was saying things like, "The Ouija board effing told me I want the devils to suck my effing brains out. Satan is in cabin 10. I have to get to cabin 10. The devil wants me to kill myself," and so on. We were in cabin 3, over half a mile from where he apparently intended to meet the devil. My dad kept a grip on him for apparently a good 15 minutes until the cops showed up. The first thing out of the one guy's mouth was, "Jamie, when they let you out?" He'd been released from jail just 2 weeks earlier for arson. You know where he was standing when my mom was at the sink in the kitchen? It was right beside the propane tank. I was visiting a school in New York a few months back. I'm from the West Coast. And my mom and I are on the train from Grand Central to Poughkeepsie, and this train had a bathroom on it. When we got on, there was standing room only, so we and about 4 or 5 other people were standing by the bathroom. This older man, maybe 45, starts chatting with us. He asks where we're from. We had our bags with us. what brought us to New York, and talks about how this was his daily commute. He was very kind to me and my mother. So as we're riding along, a man comes out of the bathroom in quite a huff, and the kind man we've been talking to excuses himself to go into the bathroom. Remember, the train is moving at full speed at this point. A couple minutes later, a woman and a small child ask if the bathroom is occupied. So all of us who are standing around the bathroom answer yes. 5 minutes pass, then 10 minutes, until she becomes skeptical. She pulls open the door and it's unlocked, and the bathroom is empty. What the? There are no windows in this bathroom. There is only one door. We all agreed he hadn't seen him leave, and all of us who had been there when he went in are dumbfounded. Where had this guy gone? I never found out. I never saw him again. I still have no idea what happened. Once, in the middle of the night, I was burning some CDs for my car. I was sitting by my computer, and behind me was a window to the street, but the view's blocked by a big round bush tree. It was around midnight and I got bored. I took up one of the CDs and wanted to look at myself through the reflection. But besides seeing my own face, I saw something else. It was a head. It was only the head, and it was behind me. The face was completely grey. He had no eyes, only a darker shade of grey where the eyes would have been. It just blended in grey with his forehead. He looked like he was in his mid-20s, with a clean parted haircut like someone from a World War II photo. I set the CD down, got up, calmly walked into the living room. Luckily, he was facing my PC monitor. If he had been looking right at me, I probably would have had a heart attack. I was out hunting in northern Ontario, and there were no roads except for logging roads within about 130 kilometres of me. I was late in the bear season, so no one was out hunting in my quadrant. I found a nice campsite alongside a river and hunted from there. On the second day of my hunt, I came across the bear tracks. I tracked it for about 2 hours, and then I turned around. And this is where stuff got very freaking weird. I always track on one side of the tracks and return on the other side. At around midnight, I heard the snap of a branch. After hunting for 20 years, I can tell you only 2 things snap branches: bears and humans. I grabbed my firearm and a flashlight and went out after the noise. Every 100 yards, I'd scan with a flashlight. My dog freaked and started growling and advancing into the woods slowly. I pulled back on his leash to slow his advance and switched on my flashlight. That night, I sat up with my flashlight, constantly scanning the tree line. I guess I dozed off at around 1 a.m. and woke again at about 3 a.m. I was sweating, confused, and very scared. I scanned the forest, and just barely visible about 25 yards into the forest was a man and his dog. He was looking right back at me. I started to approach him, shouting to him. I got within 10 feet. He looked awfully disheveled and stank. The worst part was that he just stared. And even when he smiled, his eyes showed zero emotion. And then he whispered, "Good night." I ran back to my tent, packed it into my pack, and loaded it onto the trailer of the ATV and drove out of there. The summer after I graduated from high school, I worked as a highway litter crew supervisor. I drove 2 younger teens around and had them pick up litter on the side of the road. One day, one of the kids flagged me over and showed me a weird bag he'd found. The bag was a very thick, semi-translucent plastic, double-bagged and tied off at the top with a black electrical tape. It was down in a dish covered with brush, so the kid and I dragged it to the side of the road for closer inspection. It was really heavy, and it took 2 of us to get it out of the ditch. Once we got it to the roadside, it became apparent that the bag was filled with a reddish-brown slush and a bunch of heart pieces. bones. It was then that I realized that this was a sack filled with a rotting corpse of some kind. I called my boss, and he told me to call the police. The police showed up pretty nonchalantly, but became visibly upset once he'd inspected the bag himself. He took down my statement and contact information and then shooed us along as he called into the station for assistance. We never heard anything back from the police, and I never did find out what or who exactly was in the bag. I used to work weekend nights, and my wife would always be home alone with her car in the driveway. One particular Saturday, I was at work, and my wife happened to go out with her friend. Her friend picked her up, so her car was still in the driveway. When I got home at 1 a.m., the power to the house was out. I went to check the circuit breaker and saw that the padlock on it had been cut. I promptly went inside and called 911. Here is the conclusion I have come to. Someone had been watching us for a while and knew our habits. That Saturday, they saw her car in the driveway and my car gone. They cut the lock and threw the circuit breaker. This would have baited her outside. She would have been outside with the front door unlocked and quite vulnerable. I bought a nice bottle of wine for her friend and a shotgun for the house. I work at an anonymous suicide hotline. People never understand why. Yesterday I received a very traumatic call. I was alone at the hotline. It's pretty slow this time of year. I was studying for a test. The phone rang and I picked it up and said the organization's name and "Can I help you?" And I heard heavy breathing. I immediately assumed it was a sex caller. 50% of the calls I received are from pervy men hoping to get off on my voice or tell me gross things. So I'm a little annoyed when I say again, organization name, "Can I help you?" I hear a soft, sad woman's voice. No, I guess you can't. Immediately I feel, what was it? Excited. Because I rarely get to speak to women. Mostly men call the hotline, and like I said, a lot of them pervy. I said, "Why not? Did something happen to you today?" And she said, "I don't matter to anyone. Nothing matters." And then the woman starts softly crying. I let her cry a bit, tell her to take her time, etc. And then she starts bawling loudly. I continue to try to soothe her, but then she starts screaming at the top of her lungs. Worse than any sound I have ever heard in my life. My entire body starts to prickle all over. She was screaming into the phone and she sounded like someone getting stabbed over and over again. I watch a lot of scary movies and I have witnessed a suicide attempt, but nothing broke me down as much as this scream did. I asked her if she was in pain, if she needed medical assistance. She hung up. The call was 1 minute and 30 seconds. I felt a panic attack coming on. And then the phone rang again. I was terrified. I never ever wanted to hear that sound again. But I was even more terrified of leaving that woman alone. So I picked up. It was a pervert. I hung up on him. Once when I was 15 or 16, I woke up in the middle of the night. I was a sound sleeper. I never woke up or sleepwalked, but I bolted awake, upright in bed. Walked downstairs to get a glass of water, which makes no sense. The bathroom was right next door to my bedroom. I could have just as easily gone there for a drink, but instead felt the need to walk downstairs. Got the glass, drank it, turned to go upstairs, and then I noticed a weird bluish cast to everything. And it dawned on me. The front door was wide open. I stared at it, closed and turned the deadbolt without any thought. And then halfway up the stairs I got the chills. You know, the type of thing that, oh my God, there was a monster behind me, chills, and ran like a bat out of hell back to bed. Eventually I somehow managed to fall back asleep. The next morning, my little sister, who had the downstairs bedroom, said she dreamt a man came to visit her and that he had keys to our house. WTF.
I work a night shift at a store located in a different mall. I've never been to that mall before and figured working there would be interesting. So I took the shift. The mall closed at 10 p.m. and I left the store by 11:30 p.m. Walking back to the parking structure was kind of creepy. The concrete structure was dimly lit. There were still several cars left in the structure, probably belonging to mall employees. I had completely forgotten where I'd parked. So there I was, aimlessly wandering around the parking structure looking for my car. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw an elderly homeless man coming towards me. He asked me, "You looking for your car?" And not wanting to be rude, I responded, "Yes." The homeless man nodded and beckoned for me to follow him. Not really knowing what else to do, I decided to follow. We walked for about 5 minutes across the structure and up a flight of stairs, and then he stopped right in front of my car and told me it's not safe to drive a car that's low on motor oil, you know, and then proceeded to walk away. Getting into my car, I noticed that it was low on motor oil. I have no idea how he knew where my car was, or how he knew it was low on oil. I was watching TV in the media room, home theatre type deal with no windows or anything, of my parents' house when I was about 13 or 14. It was probably about 2:30 a.m. when I heard the doorbell ring. Mind you, I grew up in a relatively rural area, not country as such, but houses in our neighbourhood were on 5-acre lots. Our house was situated a couple hundred yards off the road at the end of a long, winding driveway that went through a pretty thick patch of woods. My point is that it required a lot of effort to get to our door. It was very unlikely that somebody would just wander up. But I digress. Back to the media room where 13-year-old me is pissing his pants. So I'm laying there on the carpet, scared shitless. Because who the rings a doorbell at 2:30 a.m. with good intentions? My parents' room is on the opposite end of the rather large house. To get there, I'd have to run through our kitchen, the entryway, and the living room, all of which have floor-to-ceiling windows because my mom likes natural light or some such. I make it to the kitchen and duck behind the island in the middle, my back towards the front of the house, where presumably the axe murderer is. Except he wasn't there. I looked out the back window at the silhouette of a man with his hand cupping his face so that he could get a better look inside. I ran and made a mad dash for my parents' bedroom. As I did, the man at the back illuminates me with a flashlight, following me as I run. I can hear him knocking on the glass as I reach the hallway to my parents' bedroom. As I rounded the corner, I ran directly into my dad, who had obviously been woken up by the commotion and was going to investigate. Side note, I didn't know my dad owned a gun until that night when I saw him walk out of his room with it. He grabbed me and with a very stern and serious tone said, "Get in the room with your mom. Lock the door behind you. Don't open it for anybody but me." Fair enough. I locked the door and hid in the corner. Time seemed to slow down. I heard the sound of the front door unlocking, my dad twisting the handle, the door opening, and then, "Oh, holy shit, officer, I didn't realize." After a short conversation between my dad and the police, I heard my dad open the door again. The police wanted to have a quick look around to make sure everything was okay, you know, being as how a man had just opened the door wearing nothing but boxer shorts with a loaded pistol in his hand. They looked around, surmised that all was as it should be, apologized, and then left. Apparently the phone lines in our neighborhood were effed up or something because we were the 5th house in a week to ghost call 911. They said they figured the same thing had happened to us, but they were still obligated to investigate every call as if it was an actual emergency.
I had lost my iPhone a few months before, and I used iCloud to trace the location of the phone to a broken down, soon-to-be-built mansion. When my dad and I went there, we found a note. The note said, "Congrats, you have found the location of the phone. Try your best to find it." We took the note to the local police and they told us it was just a phone and they wouldn't do much about it except file a report. To this day, there has been no events about my stolen iPhone 4. I spent about 6 months in Europe, mostly alone, but meeting up with friends here and there. I went to Amsterdam for a week at the beginning of my trip and 2 weeks at the end. Maybe 2 or 3 days before I was supposed to come back to the US. I planned a lovely day of getting really baked and walking to the enormous and lovely Vondelpark. Before continuing, I'm just going to say that Amsterdam is nothing like the movies. It's beautiful, full of canals, museums, bikers, swans and stuff. It's just great. Anyway, so I got insanely high and began my trek to the park. On the way, the short dude who looked like a young Steve Buscemi walked past me going the opposite way and I accidentally made eye contact. He stopped and wanted to talk to me even though I told him I wasn't interested in conversation, and then insisted that he'd walk me to the park to keep me safe. He asked me tons of questions and told me all about himself, while I kept insisting I didn't want to talk and just wanted to go alone to meet my friends. After about a 40-minute walk of hell, we entered the park, and I pointed to the nearest building and said I was meeting my friends there. Said bye and ran into the building. I was inside, sitting to the side of the front door for about 20 minutes. When he came inside, he saw me and I saw him and he quickly ran out the door. At that point, I was really upset that he was following me, and I stayed inside the building for another hour. I peeked outside through a window and I saw him sitting on a bench directly outside the building. I told the women working the front counter that there was a man following me and asked if they knew of any other exits or ways to get out of the park. At this point, my buzz is completely gone and replaced with cold apprehension. They directed me to a little side path and exited to a small side street, but would quickly connect to the main street again. So I left through the back and went out that way. About halfway down this quiet cobblestone road outside the park, I suddenly heard pounding feet, and then I was grabbed from behind and slapped so hard that I screamed and hit the ground. The couple walking together looked over and then kept walking. He yelled, "That's what you get for lying to me," then ran off, breathing hard. I started crying and ran to the main street, and then began speed walking through the crowd back in the direction of my hostel. I was terrified, but just kept walking faster and faster and faster. After a few minutes, I glanced over my shoulder, and he was immediately behind me, walking in my footsteps. I almost threw up in panic. I went into the first doorway I could find while he disappeared into the crowd. I begged the employees at the jewelry store to call the police, but they told me no, the police station was only a few blocks away, and gave me really confusing directions. I asked the other customers if anyone would be willing to call the police because a man was chasing me. When I got off the train, I had no idea where I was and just sat down and cried. After maybe 15 minutes, though, a walking tour went by, and at the end of it were these two geeky, like 15, 16-year-old German boys who I'd met a few days before. They had asked me to show them how a bong works at a cafe, and they instantly recognized me and invited me to join the tour, which ended up being really fun. All in all, it was a terrifying afternoon, but a very fun evening. I have a friend who moved into a new house about 2 months ago. The third night there, she was tucking her 7-year-old daughter in, and the little girl suddenly exclaimed, "Mom, I just saw an angel." And then she told her mom all about the man wearing a hat who had been standing in the corner of her room. She said she couldn't see his eyes, but could tell he was nice. Once a year, my father would take me up to Missouri to visit his mom. It had been discussed that these visits would be a family ordeal, but ultimately he decided it'd be best to just be a guy's trip. Therefore, my mom and my sister would be left at home. Granted, they couldn't go shopping or get their nails done or anything of that kind. My sister was only 4. Most of the time, they just stayed home, watched a movie, went to bed early. One night, the two of them had finished a movie with appropriately accompanying ice cream, and my sister had run up the stairs to get ready for bed. My mother cleaned up the kitchen, picked up the den, and prepared to join my sister upstairs. Reaching the bottom of the steps, my mother looked up into the abyss of our 2nd story. All the lights turned off. One by one, she crept up the stairs, a sense of anxiety and dread gaining on her shoulders with every step. No light switches were nearby, and my sister's presence was disturbingly absent. My mother slowly was consumed by the feeling of being alone in the darkness. Her breathing got heavier. Her head swam in anticipated despair. She neared the top of the stairs. Suddenly, something caught her eye. Unsure and unwilling to reveal the source, my mother slowly rotated her head towards the obstruction. Directly eye level with her, just behind the banister, she saw it, a small baby shoe. She followed the leg up to reveal my sister. A sigh of relief was let out as my mother's concern is lifted. She reached the top of the stairs and picked up my sister, too thrilled with her alleviation of stress to even turn the light on. She closed her eyes as she hugged my sister, and then her smile slowly slid off her face as she realized my sister wasn't hugging her back. She opened her eyes, realizing it's darker with the eyes open than eyes shut, and frantically, with the abrupt return of her fear, she desperately reached out for a switch. Tension grew so thick it's nearly palpable as she groped the wall, looking for a switch to release her from the darkness. At last, she located the switch and illuminated the hallway. For a second time that night, she breathed a sigh of relief. My mother turned back to my sister to ask her what she was doing in the dark, but my sister was not there. She was standing in the doorway to my mother's room. However, this room represents more than just a resting place. Through that doorway lies her sanctuary, her safe haven, an untouchable place of zen. My sister softly giggles, turns to face my mother and asks a question. Her tone was low, almost a whisper, causing my mother to have to strain to hear. But no matter how small or inaudibly my sister speaks, my mom heard it clearly when she said, "Mommy, who's that man in your room?" So, my mother works with mental patients. Well, she doesn't, but she runs security over all of the company's residences, so she occasionally has to deal with them. One night, at around 9 o'clock, she told me she had to go to work because there was an emergency. So later I get a phone call from her. She basically said my name, and before she could finish the sentence, the phone got pulled away from her. In this high-pitched, creepy-ass voice, one of the patients says my name. I assume she heard my mom say my name. And then my name. "Your mom isn't coming home tonight because I'm gonna do something bad to her." And then she hung up. I started freaking out, and my mom decided to wait 2 hours to call me back. The woman ended up getting arrested, but released since she has a mental illness. Creepy as hell, very unnerving. Once when I was 15 or 16, I woke up in the middle of the night. I was a sound sleeper. I never woke up or sleepwalked, but I bolted awake, upright in bed. Walked downstairs to get a glass of water, which makes no sense. The bathroom was right next door to my bedroom. I could have just as easily gone there for a drink, but instead felt the need to walk downstairs. Got the glass, drank it, turned to go upstairs, and then I noticed a weird bluish cast to everything. And it dawned on me. The front door was wide open.
I stared at it, closed and turned the deadbolt without any thought. And then halfway up the stairs I got the chills. You know, the type of thing that, oh my god, there was a monster behind me chills, and ran like a bat out of hell back to bed. Eventually I somehow managed to fall back asleep. The next morning, my little sister, who had the downstairs bedroom, said she dreamt a man came to visit her and that he had keys to our house. WTF. My immediate family can attest to the ultimate creepiness that is nighttime in Mexico. My mom was probably around 12 or 13 when this story happened. Even to this day, they are reluctant to talk about it. My grandma, my mom, and Tia Pepe were driving home late at night down a dirt road. Of course. Now, typically people are advised not to do that at night in Mexico because of bandits and such, but also because it's said the devil walks the road at night. They were about halfway home when they saw a man in a white suit and hat who looked really wealthy, walking alone down the road. He didn't look lost, just casually walking. The man appeared to be very attractive, and they were tempted to stop the car and see if he needed help. But my grandma insisted that they keep driving because she had such a heavy feeling of dread in her stomach. The closer they got to the handsome man, the more they could tell there was something off about him. He was extremely pale, so much so that his skin glowed, but was absolutely beautiful. He turned around, smiled at them, and then they saw, when he turned around, that his eyes were red. My grandma hit the gas and got the fuck out of there. Pretty sure they said about 200 Hail Marys that night and drank a shitload of holy water. I work nights sometimes, and when I do, my wife stays with her mom. I have a home alarm system and live in a 3-story house. The past few weeks, my alarm has been going off when I am not at home. They call me and tell me that the motion detector in the hallway was triggered. Over and over again, I get home and the door is still locked and there's no signs of movement. I should add that I have no pets. One day after the alarm was triggered, I got home and the front door was wide open. My wife says she swears she closed it. My only guess is she did not close it all the way and the window would open. To this day, I feel like someone is in my house hiding until I leave. It doesn't help that my son says weird stuff like, the monsters are upstairs, or the man wants to play. He woke up one morning and said the blue man was at the window. Down around where I live in Texas, we hunt along an old dried-up river. One night I was out hunting some boar and found a nice camping spot. Made camp, got set up, and then out of nowhere, a guy walks up and asks for food. Instantly I knew something wasn't right about this guy. He gave me a terrible, terrible feeling. 25 miles from any road or civilization and someone just happens on my campsite? F that noise. As soon as I saw him, I knew to unlatch my pistol from the holster and keep the safety off. I made dinner and we ate and chit-chatted. After we ate, he says his thanks and walks off into the brush. I passed out around 3 a.m. with my hand on my gun, slept lightly, and woke up and decided to try and find where he came from and where he went. Normally I'm a pretty good tracker, but I couldn't find his tracks leading in or out of camp. It was soft, kind of muddy ground and should have shown his tracks, but there was nothing. Not even a broken branch or a smashed leaf. Haven't been out hunting there since. When I was very small, I lived in a very nice house in a quiet neighborhood. I always liked living there, and eventually moved out without incident. One day I was in the neighborhood with my mother and asked her what she had thought about living there. She said she never wanted to set foot in that house again. I immediately asked her why, and her response has always left me slightly creeped out. She told me about how, when we lived there, my younger brother would talk to corners of the rooms and ignore other people in favor of talking gibberish to a wall. She then learned from our neighbors that an old man had died in the house a few years before, right where she slept. Well, this made her even more nervous, but she persevered. Over the next few months, everything went on as normal until she asked me, I was about 6 or 7 at the time, why I looked so tired. I then told her about the heads that I talked to at night. Apparently, I held long conversations with a ring of 5 severed heads nailed to my door every night for over a month. We stuck it out for 3 more years before noping the hell out of there. We were having a party at my apartment with my friends from college. We had music, beer pong, drinks, typical party. Pretty low-key. There were only like 12 of us there, just looking for something to do on a Sunday night, since we all had the Monday off. We lived in a complex that has a bunch of rows of townhomes and a huge parking lot. It was about 11:30 p.m. and there was a knock at the door. Figuring it was one of our neighbors, I opened the door. And there was a very pale, skinny, bleached blonde girl standing there. She looked sickly, like a serious drug addict. She asked if any of us had a lighter, and my friend Nick gave her one. She walked into our apartment and lit her cigarette in our kitchen while everyone stood there silently and awkwardly watching her. She stood there for a minute, looked around, and then abruptly said, "Thanks," and walked out the door. Our window was open and we saw her walk down the stairs to the parking lot and get in a car directly in front of our window, watching us. There was another girl and a guy in the car with her, equally sickly looking. We laughed it off and the party went on. Every so often, however, we would look out the window and the same car would be there. The same people, always watching us. This carried on until about 1:30 a.m. when the three got out of the car and knocked on our door again. Nick opened it to see what the hell they wanted. He's an extremely intimidating looking guy. And the blonde girl said with virtually no expression, "We just wanted to know if we could come in. You guys look like fun, like beer pong fun." We politely declined since it was late and people would be leaving soon, and she got irate and started screaming at us that we were idiots. We closed and locked the door. They walked back to their car and watched us again. Everyone started to leave around 2:30 a.m. The only people left were my roommate and I, 2 20-year-old females. The car was still there, still watching us. My roommate and I sat at the kitchen table talking about what we should do, and the car started flashing the lights into our window, which went on for a few minutes. We shut the lights off and closed the blind, but peeked through them to see what was going on. The car sat there for another few minutes and then drove away. It was one of the most bizarre moments of my life. I was getting gas in Portland, Oregon, about 6 years ago. Shortly after leaving the Horse Brass pub after having dinner with a couple of friends. I don't remember which gas station it was, but I recall it being a few blocks from the Horse Brass. It should be noted that in the state of Oregon, you're not allowed to pump your own gas. The station attendant was an old bearded white guy with a steely look in his eyes. I told him to fill up the tank and he did so, saying nothing. After he was done, he leaned in close to my window and whispered in a gravelly voice, "You see that guy over there?" And he motioned towards the corner of the building where a young black man was pacing nervously. And he said, "He's getting ready to kill me." I said, "Really? How do you know?" "I can see it in his eyes. I ain't afraid of him. I already been dead once." I had no idea what to say, so I just paid and got the fuck out of there. My friend, who was in the passenger seat, was really stoned and it freaked him out so bad he was on the verge of tears. I'm still completely dumbfounded and creeped out by that experience. When I was little, my house bordered on the woods, and my neighbor and I always used to play in the woods. Well, this one time, this hiker guy was there, and he was talking to us, and we were sitting on the stone fence that borders my property line. He kept telling us how he was going to come over and take us home. But we kept telling him he couldn't because we were on our property line. We weren't the brightest 9-year-olds. Finally, my dad came over to see who we were talking to, and the guy left.
I thought it was creepy then because he was telling us that if he caught us, he would take us home and eat us. I think it's creepy now because I know that a property line probably wouldn't have stopped him. One of my friends has some land out in the country, and he invited a group of about 8 of us to go up there for the weekend. One night, we're all kind of sitting around a fire near the edge of the woods. There's been some smoking and drinking, but not enough that we were crazy or anything. Anyway, we're all joking and talking and just having a good time when suddenly one of the guys, let's call him Mike, looks over at the woods and freezes. His face goes dark as his eyes widen and his mouth slowly opens. By now we've all frantically glanced at the forest to see only trees. Finally, one of us breaks the silence to ask Mike what's wrong, and he cuts us off mid-sentence to alert us to the hooded man in black that's standing at the edge of the forest. We all look over again, hoping to see nothing, but expecting to see something. But again, only trees. We reassure him that there's nobody there, to which he responds, "The hooded man, he wants to kill y'all." Now, this isn't exactly what you want to be told around midnight in a remote location, especially when we're all a bit under the influence. Starting to get panicked, we started joking about it, saying, "Oh yeah, here he comes." But Mike's expression doesn't change. "He's walking over here, he's going to kill us. Touch my shoulder and end this." Now we're really starting to get freaked out. Plus, we have no idea what the shoulder bit means. Mike's anxiety and hostility continues to increase, and he keeps repeating, "The hooded man, the man in black, he wants to kill you. Touch my shoulder and end this." Finally, he bursts into tears. We sat in silence for a few minutes while he sobbed, and then his trance was broken. After this unpleasant experience with unseen hooded murderers, Mike's buddy tells us that Mike has had a recurring dream his entire life of a hooded man in black killing his entire family. Then right before he kills Mike, he touches his shoulder and Mike wakes up. Either way, that was the creepiest night of my life. My grandfather and grandmother decided it would be fun to have a seance at their old apartment in New York. They invited my aunt, and she invited a mutual friend of hers who specialized in these things. Halfway through the seance, my aunt's friend's tongue was lodged in her throat. My aunt and grandmother tried to help her as she was choking, and my grandfather was rocking back and forth, eyes rolled in the back of his head, whispering things like, "He knows what we've done. He's coming to get us. He found us. Satan will save our souls." That told me my grandfather was inside their room rearranging these dolls that my grandmother had. He put them on their bed, all facing towards each other, whispering some more crazy shit my grandmother couldn't understand. He had gone to the hospital that night, later being discharged, claiming he was fine and just a bit shaken up. After this incident, my grandfather went insane. He tried to kill my grandmother and his own mother. When he tried killing my grandmother, she said he had knocked on the apartment door covered in dirt saying, "I'm sorry, it's his wish," and then lashed out at her with a knife. I don't know exactly what he did to his mother, but she had to go to the hospital because of her injuries. My mum tells me that sometimes she'd wake to him standing over her bed, speaking in another language. He was forced into a mental institution and later died of a heart attack. My grandmother visited him the day before he passed and stated that he told her, "It's too late, he's here now," over and over again.
You've been listening to Dead Air. Like and subscribe for more. Good night.